My name is Selena, and I'm 58 years old. The day I hung my daughter's portrait, my sister smirked and said, "You paint out of pity." I didn't argue. I just cleaned my brush and kept painting. She thought she'd embarrassed me. But when the gallery lights later revealed my name in gold, she finally understood what silence can create. The first time I picked up a paintbrush, it wasn't to create beauty. It was to survive grief. When the house finally goes quiet, the sea does most of the talking. It hums against the rocks below my cliffside porch, murmuring in rhythms that used to lull my daughter to sleep. Silence isn't empty here. It's crowded with the footsteps I remember, the laughter that stopped 5 years ago on a rain-slick road. Widowhood taught me how to make do with absence. Losing Anna taught me how to breathe underwater. I didn't set out to become an artist. I set out to keep my heart from turning to stone. The day after the funeral, I found an old brush in a box of school supplies and a jar of pale blue craft paint. I dragged color across a scrap of cardboard because words had failed me, and blue understood what language would not. That first uneven stroke was like prying open a sealed window. The room flooded with weather I finally recognized as my own. The attic studio happened by accident. The roof line cleaves the space into a crooked triangle, beams exposed, a single dormer squinting toward the harbor. Light climbs the wall in slow, gold ladders each morning, and I climb with it. Up here, my grief has a place to sit. It wears aprons, it stains fingers, it dries in thin skins on the rim of jars. I work until tide and time forget their names. My sister, Fiona, never understood this sanctuary. She is 6 years younger and believes success should be loud. In her world, worth is measured by square footage, glossy brochures, agents who wear sharp heels and carry sharper smiles. She sells other people's dreams for a living and calls it realism. She says I'm sentimental because it's safer than admitting she's frightened by anything she can't price. Fiona visits when a deal falls through or her calendar needs filling. She walks through my rooms as though appraising them, fingers grazing the mantel, eyes lingering on cracks in the ceiling. When she climbs the attic steps, she always hesitates at the top, as if oxygen thins around art. "You still at this?" she'll say, half affection, half exasperation, like she's humoring a child who won't outgrow a phase. I learned long ago that arguing is futile. She doesn't dislike my paintings. She distrusts what they might pull from her. Last week, I finished the portrait I have been afraid to paint. Anna at 17, the summer before everything folded. A blue dress because she loved the feeling of sky against her skin. A loose braid over one shoulder, unruly as her laugh. I didn't paint the dimple she hated or the tiny scar on her chin from the swing set. Grief edits even as it records. But I painted her gaze exactly, that mix of mercy and mischief, as though she forgave the world in advance. I hung it where the light is tenderest, on the north wall, beside the dormer. When Fiona arrived unannounced, her perfume entered first, then her skepticism. She stood before the frame a long time, lips pressed, pupils flicking like she was reading small print. "You paint out of pity," she said at last, voice soft with something I couldn't quite name. "Not talent, pity, for her and mostly for yourself." There are words that bruise more slowly than fists. I felt them bloom under my ribs, but I merely nodded, as if she'd reminded me to buy milk, and asked about her newest listing. She launched into the square footage, the staging, the hedge that needed trimming. My silence served us both. It kept her comfortable and kept me from shattering. When she left, evening sifted blue through the attic. I sat on the floor in front of Anna's face and let quiet finish what anger had begun. "One day, they'll see," I whispered. Not as a threat, but a promise to the girl who taught me how to survive. The portrait did not answer, but the sea below struck the rocks with a firmness that felt like approval. Hours later, I washed brushes until the water ran clear. I checked window latches, unplugged the old space heater, smoothed a wrinkle in the drop cloth as if tidying a bed. Grief has its rituals, and mine favor small obediences that make mornings gentler. Before I slept, I cracked the window to let in the briny night, that stubborn, faithful breath. Morning comes in gull calls and a coffee mug warm between my palms. I carry it upstairs intending to repaint a shadow under Anna's chin. Instead, I notice a glint on my phone, a notification I almost swipe away with the rest of life's noise. The subject line is strange enough to stop my thumb. Inquiry re. Portrait in blue. I open it because curiosity is a muscle I have trained back from atrophy, and because the house is suddenly too still. My pulse ticks a little faster, like a clock that remembers it has work to do. The next morning, my phone pings with an unexpected email from an art curator who says she saw my portrait online and wants to meet me. When the email came, I thought it was spam. Who would want my grief on their walls? The message sat in my inbox like a misdelivered letter, its subject line too formal, its sender too unfamiliar. I almost deleted it. The words art curator sounded foreign, like a title from someone else's life, but something about the way she'd written, "Your portrait moved me," made my thumb hesitate above the trash icon. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each pass tightened the air around me. Her name was Maya Linton, and she claimed to be curating an exhibition for emerging late-blooming artists at the Charleston Coastal Gallery. She said she'd stumbled upon my painting through a small online art forum where a friend of hers had shared it. Apparently someone, probably one of the few people who followed my quiet uploads, had posted a photo of Anna's portrait. Maya wanted to meet. She wrote, "There's a story in your brushwork, Selena. A life lived deeply. I'd be honored to show your work." I laughed out loud, though it wasn't humor. It was disbelief trying to disguise itself. My work? The thought of my attic paintings hanging beside those of trained artists felt absurd. My grief wasn't gallery material. It was private scaffolding, holding up what remained of me. Still, I couldn't stop rereading the email. Her words were steady, kind, and strangely confident, as if she knew something I didn't. I left my laptop open all day, hovering near it while pretending to tidy, to cook, to dust the shelves. Every hour, I'd refresh the screen, half hoping the message would vanish so I wouldn't have to make a decision. That evening, I called Fiona. I shouldn't have, but old habits die harder than sorrow. "An art curator?" she repeated, laughter already in her voice. "Oh, Selena, please tell me you're not falling for that. Those gallery people love a sob story. It's probably charity for sad old ladies who paint flowers and sunsets." Her words stung like lemon in a paper cut. I managed a small chuckle to match hers, because if I didn't, she'd hear how much it hurt. "Maybe you're right," I said, though a part of me, a quiet, stubborn corner, hoped she wasn't. After we hung up, I scrolled back to the portrait photo on my phone. Anna in her blue dress, the light pooling around her like forgiveness. What if Maya had really seen something? What if this wasn't pity, but recognition? That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing Anna's voice, faint but familiar, the way she'd whisper when she was younger. "Mom, promise me you'll never stop painting, even when it hurts." By morning, I'd made up my mind. I replied to Maya's email with trembling fingers. "Thank you for your kind message. I'd be honored to attend. Please let me know what you need from me." Her response came within the hour. Warm, excited, immediate. The showcase was 2 weeks away. She asked for 3 pieces, framed and ready, and offered to cover the cost of transport. I could almost hear her smile through the words. The following days blurred into preparation. I polished frames, retouched edges, and ironed a dress I hadn't worn since Anna's graduation. My old car protested every errand, coughing and groaning, but it got me to the hardware store and back, which was all that mattered. I was nervous enough to forget to eat, yet beneath the nerves, something fragile began to stir. A quiet, unfamiliar flutter that might have been hope. When the evening of the showcase arrived, I stood in front of the gallery's glass doors, palms damp against the fabric of my dress. Inside, lights shimmered off white walls, and wine glasses clinked like wind chimes. The crowd buzzed with effortless chatter. Most of the artists looked half my age, their confidence worn like perfume. For a moment, I thought of turning back. But before I could, a woman with curly dark hair and sharp green eyes approached, smiling like she'd been expecting me all along. "Selena Hart," she said, extending her hand. I'm Maya. I'm so glad you came. Her warmth steadied me. She spoke about my paintings with a gentleness that didn't sound rehearsed. Your work doesn't scream for attention, she said. It listens. People can feel that. We walked together through the exhibition space. I watched strangers pause in front of my paintings. Small, intimate pieces of my heart pinned to a wall for all to see. A young couple stood hand in hand, whispering. An elderly man wiped his eyes. I realized, with quiet awe, that they weren't seeing pity. They were seeing themselves. Later, when Maya introduced me to a few guests, I stumbled through small talk, but managed to smile. For the first time in years, I felt visible, not as a mother who'd lost or a sister who'd failed to keep up, but as a woman who had something left to give. By the end of the night, my feet ached, my cheeks hurt from smiling, and my heart throbbed with something that wasn't sorrow. It was pride, shy but undeniable. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I exhaled, ready to slip quietly back into my ordinary life. But before I reached my car, a man's voice called out behind me. "Excuse me," he said, slightly breathless. I turned to find a stranger in a gray coat, his eyes bright with something urgent. "That portrait of the girl in blue," he paused almost reverently. "Is it for sale?" His question hung between us like a spark, the kind that could either burn away the past or light the way to something new. He said he could feel my painting breathe. No one had ever said that to me before. The man stood a few paces away from me, the night air curling between us. His voice trembled slightly, as though he'd just stumbled into something sacred. I remember gripping the strap of my purse, unsure how to respond. Compliments were still foreign currency to me. I didn't know how to spend them. He stepped closer, extending a hand. "My name's Daniel. Daniel Rhodes." His handshake was firm but gentle, the kind that didn't try to prove anything. "I collect art, but yours is different." Different. I'd spent 5 years trying not to be noticed, and here was a stranger naming my difference as a virtue. I managed a polite smile. "I'm glad it spoke to you." He nodded slowly, eyes still bright. "Spoke? No, it breathed. I could feel it breathing, like someone remembering love." For a moment the world tilted. I'd painted Anna from the air between memory and forgiveness, each brushstroke a heartbeat I'd borrowed from her. To hear him say he felt that made my throat tighten. Then came his question, quiet but deliberate. "Would you consider selling it?" I hesitated. "No," I said softly. "I can't part with that one. It's personal." He didn't push. "I understand. Some things shouldn't be sold." Then, after a pause, "But would you ever paint something for me? A commission, maybe? Something that feels like that portrait." It was the first time anyone had ever asked me to paint for them, not just to fill the silence of my own home. "What would you want me to paint?" His smile was distant, touched with sorrow. "My wife. She passed away 3 years ago. I've seen photos, but they never looked alive the way your painting did." Grief recognized grief. I nodded. "Send me a picture," I said. "I'll try." When I got home that night, the house didn't feel quite so empty. I stood in front of Anna's portrait, tracing the soft line of her cheek with my eyes. "Someone else saw you," I whispered. "Really saw you." The next morning, Daniel's email arrived with a photo attached, a woman with kind eyes and silver-threaded hair. He wrote a few lines about her, how she loved hydrangeas, how she always hummed when she cooked, how she'd told him once that color could heal a person if they let it. I printed the photo and tacked it above my easel. The painting took weeks. I didn't rush it. I couldn't. As I worked, I found my rhythm again, the old rhythm that used to guide me before pain dulled everything. Each brushstroke was a small resurrection, the smell of oil paint, the scratch of bristles against canvas, even the ache in my back. It all made me feel alive. When I finally showed Daniel the finished piece, he didn't speak right away. He stood there in the studio, the sea murmuring outside, his hand pressed against his chest. "It's her," he whispered. "It's really her." Then he turned to me, eyes glistening. "You've given her back to me." I didn't know what to say. Words would have cheapened the moment, so I only smiled. Later, I told Fiona about the commission, half out of pride, half because some part of me still craved her approval. Her reaction was immediate and cruel. "So now men are paying you out of pity too? You really are milking this tragedy for attention, Selena." Her laughter sliced through the fragile joy I'd built, but this time it didn't destroy it. It only echoed in the distance, like thunder after lightning has already passed. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned back to the canvas Daniel had just taken home, still feeling the warmth of his gratitude in the room. In the days that followed, I painted constantly. It was as if something inside me had cracked open and light was pouring through. I woke up eager, my hands already itching for color. I painted hydrangeas, waves, strangers' faces, even Fiona once, her eyes softer than she'd ever allow them to be. For the first time since Anna's death. I wasn't painting from pain. I was painting through it. Daniel stayed in touch. He invited me to dinner with a few of his friends, artists, collectors, curators. Maya was there too, radiant and sincere. They spoke about art the way some people speak about faith, with reverence and wonder. I felt awkward at first, like an imposter at someone else's ceremony, but they kept including me, kept asking questions. Daniel introduced me to a few of his contacts, saying they'd been moved by the piece I made for him. Word began to spread in quiet circles. Emails trickled in, requests for small portraits, landscape studies, even one painting for a local hospice. Each one was like a hand reaching out through the dark, proof that what I'd created mattered. When Fiona heard about it, she called me. "So you're an artist now?" she said, voice thick with mock sweetness. "How convenient. Maybe you'll finally make a name for yourself before you hit 60. I almost laughed. For once, her words didn't pierce. They merely passed through me, like wind through open windows. That night, as I sat at my easel under the lamplight, a new email arrived. The subject line froze me in place. Formal invitation, Coastal Artists Grand Exhibition. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. The message was brief but life-changing. "We are honored to invite you, Selena Hart, to showcase your work as a featured artist at the Charleston Grand Gallery this spring." The same gallery Fiona had once dreamed of being part of. I stared at the invitation until the words blurred, my heart hammering in disbelief. For the first time in years, I didn't whisper to Anna for courage. I whispered to myself, "You've earned this." When Fiona heard about the gallery, she smiled, and then said, "They must be desperate for artists." When I told Fiona about the invitation, her smile appeared too quickly, wide, white, and hollow as porcelain. For a second, she almost fooled me. Then came the words, sharp and practiced. "They must be desperate for artists." It landed exactly where she meant it to, between my ribs, just beneath the fragile swell of pride that had been growing there. I laughed softly, a brittle sound, and said nothing. Her smirk widened, as if silence confirmed her victory. Fiona began stopping by more often after that. She brought coffee and pastries, claiming she just wanted to see how things were going. I knew better. She wasn't there to support me. She came to keep score. Every visit started with compliments and ended with subtle jabs that clung to me long after she left. "This one's interesting," she'd say, peering at a half-finished canvas. "But maybe you should tone down the colors. It's a bit chaotic." Or, "You're brave to paint such emotional subjects. I could never make my personal life so public." Her voice always carried that sweet veneer of concern, but underneath it was poison, wrapped in silk. I let her words fall like dust, refusing to brush them off or let them settle. Silence had become my best armor. Some days, though, when she left, I'd stand in front of my easel and feel my hands tremble. Her doubts echoed in my head, whispering over the sound of the sea. Was I foolish to think I belonged in a gallery? Was all this a mistake born from pity? Then I'd remember Maya's faith, Daniel's awe, and most of all, Anna's quiet voice urging me to keep painting. So I did. Every day, every night. While Fiona measured success in commissions and luxury cars, I measured mine in color and breath. The paintings came in a rush, 9 of them in all. each one a step from grief to grace. The first showed a storm-tossed shoreline, the last, a sunrise spilling over calm water. I called the series Resurgence. It was Anna's story, and mine. Maya visited often during that time, her enthusiasm grounding me. She'd stand behind me quietly, letting me work, then whisper, "You've found your voice, Selena. It's extraordinary." Her belief steadied me more than she could ever know. Daniel dropped by too, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just conversation. He treated my art as if it were already part of something larger, something worthy. Fiona noticed their visits and didn't like them. She'd arch an eyebrow and say, "You're getting quite the entourage. Be careful, Selena. People in art circles can be opportunistic." Her jealousy was so transparent, it almost made me pity her. Almost. That envy wasn't new, I realized. It had always been there, woven through our childhood like an invisible thread. I remembered being 8 and painting flowers on the sidewalk while Fiona kicked a ball nearby. A neighbor passing by had said, "You're going to be an artist someday, Selena." Fiona had kicked the ball so hard it shattered our mother's flower pot. She cried, "Of course," so I ended up the one being scolded. That was Fiona's way. If she couldn't be the best, she'd make sure no one else was. Now, decades later, nothing had changed. Only the stakes were higher. Fiona began to parade her success more loudly. "I just closed on another waterfront property," she'd brag, leaning casually against the frame of my studio door. "You'd love the view. Maybe if this art thing keeps up, you can afford one too." I smiled politely, murmured something non-committal, and went back to painting. Arguing would have given her too much satisfaction. Despite her interference, I finished the collection in time. Maya and Daniel came together to see the completed works. Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. "These don't just show grief," she said. "They show rebirth. The world needs to see this, Selena." Daniel nodded, his voice thick. "You turned sorrow into light." For the first time in years, I believed them without question. But Fiona couldn't bear being on the outside of my triumph. When she heard the opening night details, she announced, rather than asked, that she would attend. "I should be there to support you," she said, her tone honeyed, but her gaze sharp. "Family should stand together, right?" Maya hesitated when I mentioned it to her later. "Do you want her there?" she asked gently. I didn't, but I also knew Fiona. If I excluded her, she'd find a way to make herself the victim in every conversation for months. So I nodded. "Let her come." The week before the opening, Fiona hovered constantly. She commented on the seating arrangements, the catering, even my outfit. "Maybe something less black," she suggested one afternoon. "You don't want to look like you're mourning at your own show." Her words prickled, but I stayed calm. I had learned that her power depended on my reaction. The night before the exhibition, she stopped by unannounced, again, with 2 coffees and her usual smile. I was touching up the largest piece, a portrait I'd titled "Return to Light." It was my most personal painting since Anna's, and my centerpiece for the show. Fiona leaned over the canvas too close. "This one's actually good," she said softly, almost grudgingly. I turned to thank her, and that's when it happened. Her elbow nudged the coffee cup she'd set down, sending it tumbling forward. Dark liquid splattered across the canvas, streaking through the soft, pale sky I'd spent weeks perfecting. "Oh my God," she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Selena, I'm so sorry. It was an accident." But her eyes, those calculating, steady eyes, didn't match her voice. I stared at the ruined painting, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear her apologies. And in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder, was it really an accident? I watched the brown stains spread like a wound across Anna's face, and my heart broke all over again. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The hot coffee soaked into the canvas like blood through fabric, curling the paint, bleeding through the delicate strokes I'd labored over for months. My brush slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I just stood there, staring as the stain grew wider, drowning the soft blue light I'd painted to cradle Anna's memory. Fiona gasped behind me, her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God, Selena, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Her words spilled out too quickly, too smooth. There was no panic in her eyes, just a flicker of something colder, quieter. I couldn't speak. I could only reach for a clean cloth, pressing it gently against the wet canvas, trying to lift what could not be lifted. The brown stains smeared, darker now, crueler, turning Anna's face into something ghostly and twisted. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the frame. Fiona stepped forward, pretending to help. "Maybe you can fix it," she offered, voice falsely bright. "Or just paint another. You're good at that, right?" That last sentence broke whatever was left of my restraint. I straightened slowly, still shaking, and looked at her. "You should go," I said quietly. She blinked, feigning confusion. "Selena, please." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried all the weight of every slight, every jealous word she'd ever thrown my way. Fiona's mouth tightened. "Fine," she muttered, setting down her untouched coffee. "It was an accident. Don't turn it into drama." Then she turned on her heel and left, the door closing with a soft, cruel click. When the silence returned, it was heavier than before. I sank onto the stool, staring at the ruined painting, my chest hollow. That portrait had been more than color and canvas. It had been my bridge back to hope, the piece that would complete my story for the gallery. Now it was gone. Tears came slowly at first, then all at once. I pressed my palms to my eyes and let them fall. Grief, anger, disbelief. They tangled together until I couldn't tell one from the other. Somewhere between sobs, I heard Anna's laugh in memory, light, teasing, full of mischief. "Come on, Mom, you can fix anything." I sat up. My fingers still shook, but something inside me steadied. Maybe I couldn't fix it, but I could begin again. I dragged a fresh canvas onto the easel, the smell of turpentine sharp in the air. I mixed new paint, colors deeper, more defiant than before. Midnight blue for resilience, burnt sienna for strength, and a thin streak of gold for the light Anna always carried. The clock ticked, the sea murmured, and I painted. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to cry. I painted through exhaustion, through grief, through the ache in my shoulders and the stiffness in my fingers. Each brushstroke felt like defiance, like breathing underwater and realizing you can. As the hours passed, the new portrait began to take shape. It wasn't the same as the original. This one was raw, unguarded, alive. Anna's features emerged from shadow, not serenity. Her gaze was stronger now, wiser, like she'd grown alongside me in death. I painted until dawn, until the first spill of sunlight touched her cheek. My whole body trembled from fatigue, but when I stepped back, something inside me broke open. Not from pain this time, but from release. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt free. By the time Maya arrived that morning, the studio smelled of coffee, oil paint, and salt air. I hadn't slept. My clothes were streaked with color, but I didn't care. I turned toward her as she entered, her eyes widening at the sight. "Oh, Selena," she breathed, stepping closer to the canvas. "You painted all night?" I nodded. My voice was rough when I spoke. I had to. Maya stared at the painting for a long time. Her eyes shimmered. "This one, it feels different," she whispered. "Like you finally said goodbye." Her words caught me off guard. I looked at the portrait again and realized she was right. I had painted not the girl I lost, but the woman I remembered. I hadn't painted grief this time. I'd painted truth. I exhaled deeply, my exhaustion melting into quiet satisfaction. "It's not perfect," I murmured. "It's honest," she said. "That's better." When she left, I cleaned the brushes one by one, my movements slow but certain. I wasn't angry anymore. Fiona had tried to ruin something sacred, but in doing so, she'd forced me to find my real strength. The new painting wasn't a replacement, it was a rebirth. That evening, I framed the portrait and packed it carefully for transport. The exhibition was only hours away. I dressed simply, brushed paint from my hands, and watched the sun sink beyond the harbor. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Not nervous, not fearful, just ready. But peace never lasts long where Fiona is concerned. When I arrived at the gallery, she was already there, dressed in silver satin, hair curled, smile gleaming for the cameras. She greeted guests as though she were the artist, not the interloper. Then, as the crowd gathered near my display, I heard her voice, clear and carrying. "She paints out of pity for herself," Fiona said, laughing lightly to a small group nearby. "That's why people think it's emotional. They're just feeling sorry for her." Her words sliced through the murmurs of admiration around me, and as the room fell quiet, all eyes slowly turned toward me, waiting to see if I would break. I didn't defend myself that night. I didn't have to. The paintings did it for me. The lights in the Charleston Grand Gallery shimmered like quiet constellations above polished floors. The hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and soft music folded together into a sound I'll never forget, a symphony of anticipation. My paintings lined one long wall under soft gold light, their frames glinting like kept promises. I stood near the back, half hidden, my hands clasped tightly around a glass of water I hadn't touched. The crowd had gathered thickly, art critics with notepads, locals in elegant dresses, a few journalists from the city. My name on the program still felt surreal, printed in graceful script under the title, Resurgence, Works by Selena Hart. I hadn't expected so many people. I hadn't expected any, really. My plan was to blend into the background, watch quietly, and leave before anyone realized the artist was trembling behind her own work. Fiona, of course, didn't share that instinct. She glided across the room like she owned it, her silver dress catching every light, her laughter pitched just high enough to draw attention. She introduced herself to guests as my supportive sister, offering commentary that sounded generous but carried tiny barbs underneath. "She's always been sensitive," I heard her say to one group near the wine table. "That's why her paintings feel so emotional. She just never quite got over her losses." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Her words couldn't touch what stood on those walls. The first ripple of silence came from a cluster of visitors gathered before the portrait Fiona had tried to destroy, the one born from its ashes. The painting glowed under the soft light, the gold streak through the sky, shimmering faintly. People didn't just look at it, they lingered. Some whispered softly, others simply stood still, their eyes wide and wet. A man in a dark jacket murmured, "You can feel her breathing in this." A woman beside him nodded, pressing a tissue to her mouth. I watched from the corner as emotions spread through the crowd, quiet but contagious. Each painting told a chapter, storm, loss, renewal, and people seemed to move through them like a story they already knew in their bones. Maya appeared beside me, her smile radiant, her voice soft. "Look at them, Selena. They see you." "I don't know what to do with that," I whispered. "Do nothing," she said. "Let it happen." At that moment, Daniel arrived looking proud enough for both of us. He clasped my shoulder gently. "You've filled this room with life, Selena. You realize that, don't you?" I didn't, not fully, but I wanted to believe him. Across the room, a well-dressed man with silver hair and a notepad leaned closer to one of my coastal landscapes. I recognized him from the local paper, an art critic known for his sharp tongue. He studied the piece for several minutes before scribbling something, then turned to Maya. "These aren't just paintings," he said. "They're confessions." Maya's eyes met mine from across the room, and she mouthed, "Did you hear that?" Fiona heard it too. I saw her expression flicker, just for a second. Her smile tightened, her posture straightened, and she busied herself rearranging brochures on a nearby table. The evening unfurled in gentle waves. Guests approached Maya, then Daniel, then finally me. Compliments came shyly, sincerely. "Your work, it feels alive. You've painted something I didn't know I needed to see. Thank you for being brave enough to share this." Each voice chipped away at years of doubt I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Then came the journalist, a young woman with a press badge and bright, earnest eyes. "Mrs. Hart," she said, notebook in hand, "could I get a few words for the feature? People are connecting so deeply with your story." Before I could answer, Fiona swept in, smiling too widely. "Oh, she's not used to attention," she said lightly. "She's very private. This is probably overwhelming for her." The reporter hesitated, looking at me for confirmation. Fiona's hand rested on my arm, the same hand that had spilled the coffee that ruined my first masterpiece. I looked at her, then at the young woman, and smiled. "Actually," I said evenly, "I'm getting used to it." The reporter grinned and began her questions, while Fiona's hand slowly dropped away. I answered each one honestly, my voice steady. I spoke about grief, about finding peace through creation, about how loss doesn't end, it evolves. By the time we finished, the crowd had shifted again, gathering near the main display for closing remarks. Maya stepped to the center of the room, her presence commanding but kind. She thanked the guests, spoke of the healing power of art, and then gestured toward me. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate a woman who turned sorrow into light, whose work reminds us that beauty doesn't erase pain. It grows from it. Please join me in honoring the Selena Hart collection." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Then I saw it, drawn back like a curtain on the far wall, a gleaming gold-lettered banner reading, "The Selena Hart Collection, a Journey of Renewal." Applause erupted, thunderous and kind. I froze, overwhelmed, my heart thundering in rhythm with the sound. Fiona's face, pale under the gallery lights, told its own story. Her practiced smile wavered, her eyes darting toward the banner as though it had betrayed her personally. Maya caught my gaze from the podium and nodded gently. "You deserve this," she mouthed. As the applause swelled, I felt something unshakable settle inside me, a quiet certainty that my life had shifted. But beneath the cheers, I could see Fiona already plotting her next move, her envy simmering like a storm just waiting for the right wind. When I saw my name etched in gold letters above the gallery door, I couldn't breathe. The world has strange ways of returning what grief once stole. That night, under the golden lights of the Charleston Grand Gallery, I stood staring at the wall that carried my name, the Selena Hart Collection. I didn't know whether to step forward or step back. My knees trembled as though the floor might give way beneath me. For years I'd lived quietly, painting in the shadows, speaking only through color. And now my name shimmered for everyone to see, carved into permanence. Applause thundered around me, swelling like the sea against a cliff. My pulse kept pace with it, a rhythm of disbelief and gratitude. Maya stood at the podium, radiant and proud. "This is not just a gallery," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "It's a tribute to courage, to survival, and to the truth that beauty can grow even from the deepest wounds. Selena Hart has given us more than art. She's given us honesty." The words struck something deep within me. I felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. Not because I wanted to appear strong, but because I wanted to remember every detail clearly, unblurred. The applause didn't sound like noise. It sounded like healing. Out of the corner of my eye, I found Fiona. She stood near the back, motionless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted from the banner to the crowd to me, disbelief etched into every line of her face. Her practiced smile had vanished entirely. For once, Fiona had no words. I could almost feel her confusion from across the room. How did I, the fragile sister who painted out of pity, end up here, surrounded by respect she'd chased her entire life? Maya beckoned me forward, and the audience parted as I stepped toward the center. Camera flashes blinked in soft bursts, the room alive with whispers and cheers. "Say something," Maya murmured, handing me the microphone. I swallowed, searching for words that felt real. "I don't know how to thank you," I began, my voice trembling. For years, painting was the only way I could speak. I painted to remember, to survive. I never thought anyone else would listen. A hush fell over the room. I met their eyes, faces of strangers, yet somehow familiar, each carrying their own invisible loss. "These paintings," I continued softly, "are not about grief alone. They're about what grief leaves behind, and what it can teach us, if we let it." When I finished, the applause came again, louder, warmer, truer. Maya stepped beside me, placing a hand over mine. "We named this gallery for you," she said softly, her voice only for me now, "because your courage brought this entire exhibition to life. You showed what healing looks like." The world blurred. My breath caught as my knees almost buckled. Daniel appeared from the crowd, steadying me with a hand on my shoulder. "Easy," he whispered. "You're allowed to feel it." I nodded, unable to speak. When I finally found words, they came as a whisper. "I never imagined this." He smiled, eyes kind. "You didn't have to imagine it. You built it." Reporters swarmed then, asking questions, snapping photos. Someone asked me to pose beside the portrait Fiona had ruined, the one I'd repainted from its ashes. I hesitated at first, but Daniel stepped forward and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That one's mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He smiled at me, signing the check without looking at the number. "It's a masterpiece of resilience," he said, handing the donation slip to Maya. "And I want the proceeds from it to go to a cause she cares about." Maya smiled knowingly. "We already have something in mind." Later during the reception, she pulled me aside near the catering table and said, "The gallery has decided to donate part of the proceeds from tonight's sales to a children's art foundation, in Anna's name." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "Anna Hart Children's Fund." Saying it aloud felt like lighting a candle. Maya nodded, eyes shining. It was as if my daughter's laughter had been returned to the world, tucked gently into every brushstroke and every child who would now hold a paintbrush because of her. As the night wound down, I stood by the entrance, gazing up once more at the letters glimmering above the gallery door. My name, etched in gold, not as a trophy, but as proof that pain could be transformed. I felt Fiona's presence before I saw her. She lingered in the doorway, her silver heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Our eyes met for just a moment. No words were exchanged. There was nothing left to say. She gave a stiff nod, turned, and slipped quietly into the night. Her exit almost invisible beneath the laughter and music behind her. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned back toward Anna's portrait. The final piece. Her face glowed softly under the light, alive with the gold streak that marked my rebirth. I reached out, brushing my fingertips near the frame, my chest tight with something achingly sweet. "We did it," I whispered. And for the first time since the day I lost her, I didn't feel her absence as an emptiness. It felt like presence, everywhere. The next morning, my phone rang early. Fiona's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated before answering, my pulse quickening as her text followed moments later. "We need to talk, privately." Fiona's voice trembled over the phone. For once, she didn't sound like the woman who always won. Her message came early, just as the tide began whispering against the shore outside my window. I'd barely poured my morning coffee when her name lit my phone again. This time, not with arrogance, but with hesitation. The text was simple. "We need to talk, privately." For a long moment, I just stared at it. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, full of ghosts. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her words drown in the distance she'd built herself. But another part, the one Anna had taught to always listen, always forgive, knew this conversation had been waiting for years. So I texted back one word. "When?" She replied almost immediately. "Today, the cafe by the docks." By noon, I was there. The wind carried the scent of salt and coffee beans, mingling in that familiar seaside cafe where I'd once taken Anna for ice cream after long beach walks. Now everything looked smaller. The chipped tables, the faded umbrellas. But memory still hummed beneath the noise. Fiona arrived 10 minutes late. She looked different. Her hair, usually sleek and perfect, was unbrushed, loose strands whipping across her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and the armor she'd always worn, designer clothes, confident posture, rehearsed smile, was gone. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from me. Her voice was fragile, stripped of its usual steel. "Hi," I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The waves beyond the windows filled the silence, Finally, she reached for her coffee cup with trembling hands. I don't really know how to start. Start anywhere, I said. Her eyes filled instantly. I was jealous, Selena. Always was. The words spilled out like something that had been caged too long. When we were kids, everyone loved you because you were kind. You didn't even try, and people just liked you. Mom, our teachers, even neighbors, you never had to fight for attention. I did. I stayed quiet, letting her unravel. When you started painting, she continued, her voice cracking, I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just a hobby. But then I saw what people felt when they looked at your work. I couldn't stand it. You made them feel, and I couldn't even make them notice me. Her confession hung there, raw and human. She looked down, twisting the napkin in her hands. I did spill that coffee on purpose, she said finally, barely above a whisper. I told myself I didn't mean to, but I did. I just couldn't stand the thought of you being praised for something real. I thought if I ruined that one painting, maybe you'd give up. The truth landed softly, not as a shock, but as confirmation of what my heart had already known. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a quiet sadness for the sister who'd built her life out of envy and regret. I took a slow breath. Why tell me now? Because seeing your name on that wall, her voice broke completely. It made me realize I've spent my whole life competing with someone who was never competing with me. You had everything I wanted, peace, purpose, and I hated you for it. And I'm sorry, Selena. I'm so sorry. She began to cry then, really cry, the way a child does when they finally admit the truth. I reached across the table, resting my hand on hers. Her skin was cold. I forgive you, I said softly, but I won't let you hurt me again. She nodded, sobbing harder. My forgiveness didn't erase her guilt. It only handed it back to her, where it belonged. For the first time, Fiona looked small to me, not because she'd failed, but because she was finally human. When her tears subsided, I stood and placed some money on the table. Take care of yourself, Fiona, I said. Then I leaned forward and hugged her gently, not out of obligation, but out of release. She trembled in my arms, whispering, "Thank you," over and over. As I walked away, the sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the waves. My steps felt lighter, as though every ounce of approval I'd ever sought from her had dissolved into the salt air. I didn't need her validation. I never had. Later that afternoon, Maya called. Her voice was bright, full of that contagious energy that always seemed to lift me. "Selena," she said, "I have wonderful news. The gallery board loved the turnout. They want to expand your collection, nationally, New York, Chicago, maybe even Los Angeles." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Maya," I whispered, "I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," she laughed. "Say you'll let the world see what healing looks like." I laughed too, the sound catching me by surprise. "Yes," I said. "Yes, let's do it." After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the sea churn in slow, silver swells. I thought of Fiona, somewhere nursing her remorse, and wished her peace. I thought of Anna, who had given me the courage to start again, and for the first time in a long while, the air inside me felt still, steady. That night, as the moon rose over the harbor, I sat at my desk, preparing sketches for the next collection. The mail had come late, and in the pile of envelopes was one that didn't have a return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate, careful. Curious, I tore it open. The first line stopped my breath. "Your daughter once told me to keep going when I had nothing left." My heart stumbled as I read on. Whoever had written this letter claimed Anna had saved their life, and they needed me to know how. The letter began, "Your daughter once told me to keep going when I had nothing left." I cried before I reached the second line. I had opened the letter without thinking, half expecting it to be another congratulations from a gallery contact or a note from Maya about logistics for the national expansion. But the handwriting stopped me first. It was careful, uncertain, like someone who hadn't written in a while and was afraid of being misunderstood. The first line undid me completely. Your daughter once told me to keep going when I had nothing left. My breath caught, and tears blurred the rest before I could finish it. I set the page down, pressing my fingers to my mouth. The ache in my chest was old, familiar, but this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like discovery. When I finally read the rest, I did so slowly, afraid to miss a single word. The writer's name was Claire. She explained that years ago, she'd been in one of Anna's art workshops for high school volunteers at the local community center. Claire had been 17, depressed, and barely showing up for classes. I didn't think anyone saw me, she wrote, but your daughter did. She sat with me during break one day, handed me a paintbrush, and said, "Sometimes you don't have to fix anything. You just have to make something." That day changed everything. I could see it, the way Anna would have said it, her gentle conviction, her habit of saving people without even realizing she was doing it. Claire went on to describe how she'd gone on to art school, graduated, and started teaching. "Last week," she wrote, "I saw the newspaper feature about your exhibit. When I saw the portrait of the girl in blue, I knew it was her. I recognized her before I even read the name. I wanted you to know that Anna's kindness didn't end with her life. It began mine." By the time I finished the letter, I was shaking. The world around me, my studio, the ocean outside, the sound of gulls, faded into something distant and holy. Anna had always been light. I'd painted her again and again, trying to resurrect that light, not realizing it had never gone out. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my heart. "You kept your promise, sweetheart," I whispered. "You're still here." The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. The sun was soft on the horizon, the air full of spring. I brought a small replica of the portrait, the same image that had started everything, and a single white hydrangea, her favorite flower. Kneeling beside her headstone, I traced the engraved letters of her name, Anna Marie Hart. I could almost hear her laugh echoing between the waves. "I got your letter," I said quietly. "Or maybe you sent it yourself through someone else. Either way, thank you." I placed the small painting against the stone, just beneath the carved angel wings, and smiled through my tears. "You gave me a second life, my love. You gave me purpose again." The wind brushed through my hair, and for a moment I could swear I felt her hand in it. Months passed quickly after that. The National Gallery circuit began with New York, a grand, echoing hall filled with strangers who somehow felt familiar. Maya walked beside me, proud as ever, while Daniel managed logistics and smiled each time the crowds gathered. Critics called me the painter who turned pain into peace. The phrase appeared in articles, interviews, even on a magazine cover once, but I never quite accepted it as truth. I hadn't turned pain into peace. I'd just learned to paint both until they found their own balance. At the grand opening, I stood before my paintings, now hung higher than I could ever have imagined, and watched people move through them with reverence. Some cried, some smiled, some stood perfectly still, hands over their hearts, and that was enough. Near the end of the evening, I saw Fiona across the room. She was quieter this time, almost subdued, her posture softer. She didn't approach me, and I didn't go to her, but our eyes met. There was no resentment there, only something that looked a lot like pride, tempered by humility. She gave me a small nod. I returned it. That was all we needed. When the applause came that night, I didn't think of success or reputation or the banner that still bore my name. I thought of a paint-smeared girl in a blue dress handing a stranger a brush and saying, "Just make something." After the show, I stayed behind in the empty gallery. The lights dimmed, leaving only soft illumination on the final portrait, the one of Anna, reborn in gold. I stood there a long time, feeling her presence, her warmth, her laughter caught between the colors. In the end, I realized I no longer painted to fill the void she left. I painted because she had shown me how to live beyond it. I turned off the last light and whispered into the stillness. I painted from grief once. Now I paint from grace. And that's the masterpiece you wanted all along. Outside, the gallery sign gleamed faintly under the moonlight, the letters carved in gold, reflecting the ocean's shimmer. The gallery still bears my name, but the soul behind every stroke belongs to her. In the end, I realized my sister's words never defined me. My silence did. What she mocked as pity became the art that rebuilt my life. Every brush stroke I've ever painted now carries Anna's spirit, not my sorrow. I don't need to prove anything anymore. The gallery, the applause, the gold letters, they all speak for themselves. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet triumph of being seen at last for who you truly are. If this story touched something deep inside you, maybe it's time to share it, because sometimes someone else needs to hear that healing is still possible. Every like, every share, every comment keeps stories like mine alive for someone who's still in their silence. So tell me, if someone once doubted your worth, what would you create to prove them wrong, without saying a single word?